In the silence of deep space, legends often sleep for centuries, waiting for the right moment to rise again. They say there are ships older than any empire, machines that outlasted the men and women who built them. Most are only myths, stories whispered by traders and wanderers, tales of vessels that carried humanity's first dreams of freedom among the stars. But myths have a strange way of turning into truth when the galaxy begins to fracture. And tonight, under the fading light of a distant red sun, one of those legends begins to stir. The black ship was not supposed to exist anymore. It had been buried in forgotten archives, erased from records, and hidden beneath the debris fields of a war most people no longer dared to speak about. It was called humanity's last relic, the final weapon forged in the fires of desperation when entire worlds were burning. They say it was not built by one nation or one people, but by survivors, engineers, soldiers, dreamers, all united in secret. It was never meant to serve a ruler. It was meant to serve freedom. And when it vanished at the end of the war, many believed it had sacrificed itself to give the galaxy one last chance at peace. Peace never came. What replaced it was control. Entire star systems were chained by decrees that stretched farther than light itself. Colonies that once sang with the voices of pioneers now echoed only with silence and fear. The rulers of the galaxy made sure no one could rise again. And if anyone dared to resist, their voices were erased as quickly as they appeared. The people had no weapons left, no hope left, until whispers began again, whispers of a relic that had not died. It started as rumors carried through the dark corridors of mining stations and the dust-filled air of desert colonies. Pilots swore they had seen something moving in the shadow of asteroids, something vast, black, and older than any warship still flying. Others claimed they had heard a hum in the void, a pulse in the silence of space, as if a great engine had drawn breath after centuries of sleep. Most dismissed it as fantasy, but there were always those who believed, and belief can be dangerous. For one young navigator, belief turned into truth. She had grown up on a border world where the stars felt closer than laws, where people worked the soil with cracked hands and still looked up every night as if waiting for something to arrive. She carried with her the stories of her elders, of a ship that fought not for conquest but for freedom. And when her scanners caught an impossible signature in the cold, abandoned reaches beyond her colony, she knew she had found what generations had been waiting for. The black ship was not just metal and engines. It was a memory, a promise written into steel. Its hull bore scars of battles long past, yet it remained unbroken. Its towers of armor stood like ancient cathedrals, silent but unyielding. When the navigator's craft drew near, the surface of the relic reflected no light, as though it was carved from the very void itself. She felt its presence before her sensors confirmed it. Something inside the ship was alive. The moment her vessel latched onto the forgotten docking bay, the past seemed to awaken. Dust drifted in zero gravity, carrying the smell of time itself, and the corridors stretched before her like veins of a giant long asleep. Lights flickered as she moved deeper inside, her footsteps echoing against walls once alive with voices. This was where people had fought for humanity's survival, where desperate hands had loaded weapons and fearless hearts had charted impossible courses. Every step she took, she felt the weight of those who came before her, and then she reached the heart of it, the core chamber. It was silent, vast and hollow, except for the single black console standing like an altar in the dark. Its surface glowed faintly, as if recognizing her presence. She hesitated, knowing that pressing her hand against it could change everything. For a moment she thought of her colony, her people, the chains they lived under, and the generations who had whispered the same stories she now carried. Then, with a breath steadying her courage, she placed her palm on the console. The chamber shuddered. Systems that had not moved in centuries roared to life. Deep within the vessel, engines the size of cities lit up with a hum that trembled through her bones. Lights surged through endless corridors, illuminating banners of dust and forgotten insignias. The black ship was no longer asleep. It was awake, but awakening a relic is not without consequence. Across the galaxy, sensors flared to life in the strongholds of those who ruled with iron authority. Hidden alarms, buried in secret code for centuries, were triggered by the ship's rebirth. The rulers knew what this awakening meant. They had spent generations burying its memory, silencing those who spoke of it, ensuring no spark of rebellion could find fuel. And now, in one single moment, the spark had become a flame. The navigator stood trembling as the core spoke in a voice not human but shaped by human hands. It asked a single question, one that echoed in the chamber like thunder. "Do you carry the will of freedom?" She knew this was the test, the threshold where past and present collided. If she said no, the ship would return to silence. If she said yes, the galaxy would change forever. Outside, the stars seemed to hold their breath. Fleets patrolled unknowingly nearby, their captains still blind to what was stirring. Colonies prayed in silence for deliverance they never expected to arrive. And in the endless void, one young navigator stood before humanity's last relic. Her voice caught between fear and destiny. She opened her mouth to answer, and in that instant, the black ship began to shift, preparing itself for a journey it had not made in centuries. Its weapons warmed with fire not seen since the last war. Its engines shook with the force of storms, and its dark silhouette stretched across the stars like the shadow of freedom itself. What would she say? What would the galaxy choose? The rulers had already set their gaze upon the awakening, and fleets were mobilizing to crush it before it could even take flight. But the ship was no longer a myth. It was real. It was alive, and it was ready. The story of freedom was about to be written again, in the fire of stars and the steel of the last relic. But who would light the first strike? The answer waited in her breath. Her hand trembled as the console's glow wrapped around her fingers, warm and steady, like the pulse of a living thing. She had whispered the word, "yes," but the sound of her voice was lost beneath the rising hum of the ship's awakening. The chamber brightened in soft bands of light, illuminating symbols carved into the walls, markings of a time when humanity still dared to believe in unity. It felt as if the ship had been waiting, not just for anyone, but for someone who carried more than curiosity. Someone who carried memory, struggle, and the will to risk everything. The navigator barely understood the scope of what she had triggered. The black ship had been built in the darkest hours of the old war, a last attempt to resist the crushing rule of powers that sought to strip freedom from every corner of human space. Entire fleets had been lost, planets scarred, and cities turned into graveyards. Out of that devastation, survivors forged a single vessel unlike any other, part warship, part sanctuary, part symbol. The ship was not commanded in the way other vessels were. Instead, it bonded with its crew, carrying their voices and their will. That was why it had vanished at the war's end. It was said to only awaken again when humanity needed it most. Now, centuries later, the galaxy's rulers had grown complacent, confident that fear was enough to keep people silent. But in the dark places of the galaxy, silence breeds resistance. Farmers spoke of freedom while planting seeds, pilots carried stories in their logs, and miners whispered of the relic as they chipped at stone in endless tunnels. No one thought they would live to see it, but they passed down the tale so that if the chance ever came, the story would not be forgotten. The navigator herself had grown up hearing those whispers by firelight, told in half voices so the patrols wouldn't overhear. Her parents had been workers, their lives marked by exhaustion and quiet resignation, yet they still taught her to look to the stars with hope. She had dreamed of seeing more than her dusty world, and when she finally earned a place as a navigator on a small cargo vessel, she thought she had escaped the shadows. But she carried the whispers with her, etched deeper than any map or star chart, and when she found the impossible signature in the void, she followed it without hesitation. As the black ship roared back to life, she began to feel the enormity of what she had done. Systems awakened in layers, as if testing themselves after centuries of sleep. Air scrubbers whirred, life support filled the stale corridors with fresh circulation, and weapons bays shifted with the weight of long, slumbering machinery. She could feel the power of the ship coursing beneath her feet. This was not just another relic of war. It was the very embodiment of humanity's stubborn will to resist. But she was not alone in her discovery. Across the stars, powerful networks flared alive with alerts. The awakening triggered codes buried in forgotten archives of the ruling fleets. Commanders who had never spoken the name of the Black Ship were now forced to act. Orders moved like fire through the chain of control: intercept, investigate, and destroy. The rulers understood better than anyone that this relic was not just a machine. It was a symbol, and symbols could ignite entire revolutions. Meanwhile, on distant colonies, whispers turned into shouts. The rumor spread faster than official channels could contain it. The Black Ship had awakened. People who had long kept their heads bowed lifted their eyes for the first time in generations. Farmers paused their work, traders shared the news at crowded ports, and children repeated the story in excitement, not fear. Hope, fragile as it was, began to spread again. The navigator wandered deeper into the ship's corridors, the lights guiding her path as though the vessel itself wanted her to see. She found signs of the crew who had once lived here: faded banners, etched words of defiance, fragments of tools and weapons left behind. The ship was a grave and a monument, but it was also alive. She felt it studying her, listening to her unspoken fears and questions. Then, in a smaller chamber near the bridge, she discovered the records. They flickered onto the wall in hazy projections, showing fragments of the last war. Images of firestorms consuming worlds, of people standing shoulder to shoulder despite impossible odds, of the ship leading one final charge into the darkness. She saw faces she did not know, their eyes filled with courage and exhaustion, their voices declaring that freedom was worth more than life itself. These were not warriors of conquest. They were survivors, dreamers, and protectors. The records ended abruptly, cut off as if the final chapter had never been written. She realized that she was holding a piece of unfinished history. The galaxy had been forced into silence, but the ship had preserved memory, waiting for someone to carry it forward. And now she stood in the center of it, a single voice about to decide the course of billions. Still, fear gnawed at her. What right did she have to awaken such a power? She was no soldier, no leader. She was just a navigator who had stumbled upon something greater than herself. But maybe that was why the ship had chosen her. Maybe freedom was never meant to belong to rulers or generals. Maybe it was meant to belong to ordinary people, willing to take a step forward when everyone else stood still. The tension grew sharper when a warning signal echoed through the ship. The Relic's sensors had detected movement in nearby space. Patrols, small at first, but growing. The rulers were already sending ships to investigate. She knew her time was short. The Black Ship could defend itself, but its strength would not remain hidden now. The galaxy's eyes were turning toward it, and soon the first battle would come. She returned to the bridge, where the console pulsed with waiting light. The ship's voice spoke again, softer this time, but insistent. "Do you carry the will of freedom?" The question was more than words. It pressed against her, searching her thoughts, her fears, her hopes. She wanted to answer, but she also wanted to understand. "If I say yes," she whispered, "what will happen?" The ship responded not with promises, but with images. Fleets rising against fleets, colonies breaking chains, worlds uniting in defiance. And through it all, the Black Ship at the center, not as conqueror, but as catalyst. The image was not one of guaranteed victory. It was one of fire and sacrifice. But it was also one of possibility, of a future not bound by fear. Her heart pounded as she considered the cost. She thought of her home, her people, and all those who had suffered in silence. She thought of the children who grew up never knowing the meaning of freedom. And she thought of the ship itself, waiting patiently for someone to continue the story. Outside, the patrol ships drew closer, their lights cutting through the darkness like searching eyes. They had not yet realized what they were approaching, but soon they would. And when they did, the first shot of a new conflict would echo across the stars. The navigator stood before the console, her voice caught in her throat. She knew the moment of choice was upon her. If she claimed the will of freedom, the Black Ship would not hide again. It would rise, and with it, the hopes of countless voices long silenced. But in doing so, she would place herself at the heart of a storm that could consume everything she had ever known. The ship waited, patient, but unyielding. The galaxy itself seemed to lean toward her answer, and as the first patrol entered scanning range, alarms flashing across the bridge. She tightened her grip on the console and drew a deep breath. But before she could speak, the ship's sensors detected something else, another signal, faint but steady, hidden beneath the patrol's transmissions. It was not an enemy. It was a call. A message buried in old codes, carrying a phrase spoken only in the darkest days of the old war. The first strike is freedom. Her eyes widened as she realized what it meant. Somewhere out there others were waiting. She was not alone. The question still hung in the air, demanding an answer, and outside, the stars prepared to witness the return of humanity's last relic. The patrol ships moved like hunting dogs through the void, their formation tight, their lights cutting across the black expanse. They didn't know what they were chasing yet. To them, it was just an anomaly, a faint surge of energy in an abandoned sector. But soon they would see the shadow waiting in the dark, and once they did, there would be no way back. On the bridge of the black ship, the navigator felt the vibrations grow stronger beneath her boots as the vessel prepared itself. The console pulsed like a living heartbeat, syncing with her own racing pulse. She hadn't given her answer yet, but it was as though the ship already knew the conflict inside her. The voice it had spoken with before now remained silent, letting the tension settle, letting her carry the weight of the choice in her chest. She looked out through the vast viewing screen. The patrols were small, scouts, fast and lightly armed, but she knew they were only the beginning. Where there were scouts, fleets always followed. She thought of her homeworld and wondered how long it would take before news of this reached there. Would her people even know it was her who had found the relic? Or would her name disappear in the chaos, replaced only by the image of the ship itself? The faint signal still lingered, hidden beneath the transmissions of the patrols. The first strike is freedom. She repeated the phrase under her breath, as if it might give her strength. Whoever had sent it, they had used codes so old that only someone tied to the ship's history would know them. It meant there were others out there, still fighting in the shadows, still keeping the memory alive. The thought comforted her, but it also made her nervous. Allies meant hope, but they also meant expectation. If she failed now, she would not just lose for herself, but for all those who still waited for a spark. Far away in the core worlds, the rulers of the galaxy had already convened. Their council chambers were high above the skylines of glittering cities, far removed from the dirt and hunger of the colonies. From those glass towers, they had maintained their grip for generations. They did not speak of freedom. They spoke only of order. And to them, the return of the black ship was not a story of hope. It was a threat to everything they had built. One commander, younger than the rest but hardened by loyalty, spoke with venom. "We cannot allow this relic to breathe again. If the people see it, they will remember. If they remember, they will resist. We must crush it before the idea spreads." His words were echoed by nods around the chamber. To them, the ship was not just steel, it was a ghost of rebellion. And ghosts had power. Orders were signed, fleets dispatched. Entire armadas turned their course toward the forgotten sector where the relic stirred. Back on the black ship, the navigator walked the empty halls, her footsteps soft against the renewed hum of systems. The ship had begun restoring itself, sealing old scars, powering forgotten bays, and unlocking chambers long sealed by time. She could feel it waking more with each passing minute, as though her very presence gave it reason to rise. In one bay, she found rows of dormant machines, craft smaller than the ship itself, fighters built for speed and strike. Their sleek frames were coated in dust, but when her hand brushed across one, its panels flickered to life, ready after centuries of silence. The sight left her both awed and unsettled. But the black ship was not the only one awakening. Across the stars, people stirred as the rumor grew louder. On mining worlds, workers began hoarding supplies, whispering that the time was near. On trading stations, smugglers and pilots argued whether the relic was real, their voices heated with both hope and fear. Even within the fleets of the rulers, quiet doubts began to spread. Some of the younger soldiers, who had grown up hearing forbidden stories, found themselves wondering if they would one day have to face the very symbol of humanity's unbroken will. The navigator did not know these ripples yet, but she could feel them in the air, as if the ship itself carried the weight of countless eyes turning toward it. Still, she was alone inside its vast halls. At times, she wondered if she was truly meant to be here, or if she had simply been in the right place at the wrong time. The question haunted her. Yet every time she hesitated, the ship seemed to draw her back to the console, waiting for her answer. The patrols had now moved closer, their scans brushing against the black ship's shields. They paused, confused by what they found. To their instruments, it looked like a massive structure, but its design didn't match anything they knew. One pilot sent a cautious message back to command, his voice laced with unease. He had heard the old stories, even though he wasn't supposed to. Deep down, he feared what this shadow might be. His fear was justified. The rulers would not wait for confirmation. To them, caution was weakness. Orders came swiftly: engage, destroy, erase. The first wave of conflict was inevitable. The navigator returned to the bridge, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. On the screen, she saw the patrols shifting into attack formation. They didn't know yet what they faced, but they were ready to strike. She gripped the console, torn between fear and resolve. "I'm not a soldier," she whispered. "I don't know how to fight this war." The ship responded by flickering images across the console, schematics of weapons, navigation routes, strategies etched into its very core. It wasn't asking her to be a soldier. It was asking her to carry the will of those who had come before. But still, she hesitated. She could feel the gravity of her choice pressing down on her. At that moment, the signal returned, clearer this time. "You are not alone." It was not a lie. In a distant sector, a hidden group of survivors, descendants of those who had once fought alongside the Black Ship, had intercepted the Awakening. They had waited for generations, passing down the codes, keeping alive the spark of rebellion. Now they prepared to rise. But to reach them, the ship would need to survive the first clash. The patrols made their move. Engines flared, weapons charged, and beams of light cut across the void. The Black Ship did not answer yet. It simply stood, massive and silent, as though daring them to strike harder. The navigator could feel the tension vibrating in her chest. She wanted to scream, to run, to do anything but stand frozen before the console. Yet she couldn't look away. Across the galaxy, people held their breath, though most didn't even know why yet. The rulers prepared fleets, the rebels prepared whispers, and the Black Ship stood on the edge of history once more. The navigator was still only one voice, caught between fear and destiny. Her choice not yet spoken, and as the patrols closed in, "Weapons primed," the ship's voice returned, calm and unyielding. "Do you carry the will of freedom?" Her lips parted, but the answer caught in her throat. The patrols opened fire. The Black Ship stirred, but not fully. It seemed to wait for her word. The first blasts struck its shields, sparking across the dark hull. The sound echoed through its corridors like distant thunder. She felt every impact, as though the blows landed against her own chest. The choice could not be delayed much longer. Yet in that moment of violence, she realized something deeper. The ship was not just asking her to speak. It was asking her to believe. Without belief, its awakening would be incomplete. Without belief, freedom could not be carried. She closed her eyes. The hum of the engine surrounding her, the thunder of enemy fire pressing closer. And though she had not spoken her final answer yet, the ship seemed to sense her wavering resolve. It waited, patient but unyielding, as though the entire galaxy was suspended on the breath she had not yet released. The first patrol wing circled for another strike, their commanders urging them on. In the shadows of the void, fleets moved. Rulers tightened their grip. Rebels whispered their hope, and the navigator stood trembling in the light of a ship that could change everything. The battle had only begun, and the choice remained. The void burned with sudden fire. The first blasts from the patrols seared across the shields of the Black Ship, scattering light like sparks across a midnight sea. The hull did not yield. Instead, it absorbed the punishment in silence, as though remembering this rhythm from long ago. The navigator clung to the console, her breath caught between fear and awe. She could feel the vibrations under her skin, not just mechanical but alive, like the heartbeat of something vast and ancient. The patrols grew bolder. They tightened formation, diving in fast arcs, hoping their concentrated fire would find a weakness. Each strike echoed through the ship's bones. The navigator's pulse raced with the impacts, her mind screaming at her to answer, to give the ship permission to act. But still her voice faltered. She was one person standing against centuries of silence, one fragile will trying to bear the weight of all humanity's hopes. The ship's voice came again, steady and calm, cutting through the chaos. "Do you carry the will of freedom?" Her lips moved, but the words caught in her throat. Fear was heavier than steel. She thought of her home, her people working under the weight of endless decrees, and she thought of the faces in the records she had seen. Faces of those who had chosen to fight even when hope was ash. Her chest ached with the pressure of the choice. If she claimed this burden, she could never turn back. Another wave of fire slammed into the ship. Alarms lit across the bridge, though none carried panic. The vessel seemed almost to be waiting, testing its own resilience while demanding her belief. And then, through the static of enemy transmissions, that hidden signal broke through once more. "You are not alone." Her eyes widened. The phrase wasn't a lie. Somewhere beyond the patrols, past the range of their scans, another presence stirred. Faint signals, coded in the same ancient language as before, flickered in the black ship's sensors. Whoever they were watching, waiting. The navigator wasn't the only one left carrying the dream of freedom, but the rulers would not allow even a chance for sparks to catch flame. In their gleaming council towers, news of the patrol engagement spread like wildfire. Commanders pressed for swift eradication. Fleets were already mobilizing, faster than light, closing in on the coordinates of the awakening. The rulers had waited generations for this ghost to stay buried. Now that it stirred, they would unleash everything to smother it. The patrols circled once more, but this time, hesitation cracked their precision. Some of the younger pilots had heard the whispers, had grown up on colonies where stories of the black ship were still told in secret. As their instruments confirmed the impossible, unease crept into their hearts. They were supposed to destroy a relic, yet what they faced looked alive, immense, and unyielding. To fire upon it felt like firing upon history itself. But duty pressed harder than doubt, and they followed their orders, unleashing another storm. The navigator gritted her teeth, gripping the console until her knuckles turned pale. She felt the heat of the blasts ripple through the shields, each strike threatening to overwhelm her courage. The ship's voice whispered again, softer this time. "One will carries many." It was not demanding. It was reminding her. The vessel was more than weapons and steel. It was memory, sacrifice, and the breath of millions who had once chosen to fight. All it needed was a single voice to awaken fully. Her mind swirled with conflict. She was not a warrior. She had never led an army, never given orders, never carried anything heavier than a star chart. But maybe freedom had never belonged to warriors alone. Maybe it belonged to whoever dared to believe in it, even in the darkest moment. Still, her fear held her silent. Beyond the patrols, the faint ally signal grew clearer. It repeated again and again, pulsing like a heartbeat across the void. "The first strike is freedom. The first strike is freedom." The message was not just words, it was a promise. Whoever sent it was ready, waiting for the black ship to rise. The patrols closed in for a final run, their weapons at full charge. The lead commander, a veteran hardened by decades of unquestioning loyalty, gave the order to unleash everything. To him, this was not a legend. It was a target. A threat that had to be erased before it breathed hope into the galaxy again. His voice cut sharp through the comms. "Fire at will. Leave nothing behind." The navigator's heart hammered as the patrols aligned their strike. This would not be a probing attack. This would be annihilation. She stared at the console, its glow steady and patient, as though it had all the time in the universe. But she knew the moment of choice was slipping away. If she didn't answer now, the relic would fall, and with it, the last chance humanity might ever have. Her throat tightened. She could almost hear the voices of those who had come before, whispering through the ship's walls, urging her forward. She closed her eyes, and in the darkness, she saw her home. She saw her people's faces, tired but unbroken, their eyes always lifted to the stars. She saw the miners, the farmers, the children who had only known silence and chains. And she saw herself, small but standing at the center of something larger than she had ever imagined. Her lips parted. But before her voice could form, the ship itself reacted. Not in defiance, but in warning. The viewing screen lit with images of incoming fleets, entire squadrons racing toward their position. The patrols were only the beginning. The rulers were throwing their full weight at the Relic, determined to crush it before it could even take flight. The scale of what was coming was unimaginable. The hidden ally signal flared stronger. This time the words were different. "We are ready. Strike, and we will rise." Her breath caught in her chest. She was not only deciding for herself, she was deciding for them, for all those who had waited, hidden, and endured generations of silence. If she faltered, their hope would die before it had a chance to breathe. The patrols unleashed their barrage. A storm of fire lit the void, converging on the black ship with the force of 1,000 suns. The navigator felt the deck tremble, the shields groaning under the pressure. She could taste the fear in her mouth, sharp and metallic. And still, the console pulsed beneath her hands, patient, waiting, demanding belief. Across the galaxy, whispers spread faster than light. On colonies and stations, people leaned toward radios, screens, anything that carried news. They didn't yet know the full story, but they knew something was stirring. Something long buried had returned. Their voices joined in quiet hope, carrying across worlds unseen. In the council chambers, the rulers leaned forward, their faces cold and unreadable. To them, this was not suspense. This was control. They believed they were watching the last flicker of a candle being snuffed out. But to the navigator, standing in the center of the storm, it was more than suspense. It was the breath before a scream, the silence before a song, the moment before history broke open. The patrol's fire hammered the ship, the enemy fleets closed in, the allies waited in the shadows, and the console demanded her voice. The tension stretched to breaking. Her body shook. Her voice trembled at the edge of words unspoken. The galaxy seemed to hold its breath with her, and as the next wave of fire surged toward the black ship, the navigator finally leaned forward, her lips parting on the edge of the answer that would decide everything. The next barrage thundered across the void, and the black ship's shields flared bright under the storm. The navigator felt her whole body tense as if the blows were landing inside her chest. She was about to speak, her answer finally on her lips, when something unexpected broke through the chaos. The ship's sensors flickered with a new signal, different from the hidden ally broadcast, sharper, stronger, and far closer. It wasn't coming from the patrols. It was coming from within the ship itself. The console blazed with sudden light, and for a moment the bridge was filled with an unfamiliar presence. A voice emerged, not the calm, steady tone of the ship, but something layered, fractured, and human. It spoke in bursts, like echoes trapped in stone. "We are still here." The navigator staggered back, her breath caught in her throat. The ship had seemed alive before, but this was different. This was not just its memory. This was a remnant of its crew, voices imprinted into its systems, fragments of those who had built it, fought within it, and refused to let it die. Their consciousness, or pieces of it, had survived inside the black ship, hidden for centuries. The voices overlapped, rising and falling like a chorus of ghosts. Some were steady, others broken, some urgent with anger, others calm with resolve. They were not illusions. They were people, preserved in the marrow of the relic itself. And they were waking, too. The navigator's knees weakened under the weight of this revelation. She wasn't just carrying the will of freedom alone. She was standing among the echoes of those who had lived it. But their awakening came with danger. The ship shook again, not from the patrol's fire, but from within. The old systems that held the memories together were unstable, straining against centuries of silence. If they collapsed, the black ship could unravel before it even took its first strike. The patrols circled again, their weapons charging for another devastating run. Yet now the navigator's fear was doubled. It wasn't just the enemy outside pressing closer. It was the voices inside the ship, demanding, pleading, warning. "Choose," they whispered. "Before it is too late." Her heart pounded. She looked at the console, its surface burning with symbols she couldn't fully understand, and felt the ship waiting on her decision. The patrols were seconds away from another barrage. The hidden ally signal pulsed steadily in the background, urging her to strike. And now, layered above it all, the voices of the past pressed against her mind, carrying the weight of countless sacrifices. Far across the galaxy, the rulers were watching too. Reports from the patrols streamed into their councils, showing the impossible, shields stronger than any known technology, weapons bays large enough to level fleets, and a shadow in the void that no one dared name aloud. Panic touched even the most seasoned of their commanders. Yet instead of retreating, the rulers doubled down. They issued new orders, unleashed dreadnoughts, weapons reserved only for planetary sieges. To them, the awakening was not just dangerous, it was unacceptable. If the Relic survived, their empire would crumble under the weight of rebellion. But even as fleets mobilized, cracks spread in their ranks. Younger officers whispered in hidden corners. Some remembered the stories told by their families, stories of the Black Ship not as a terror, but as a savior. Quietly, some began to question whether they were on the right side of history. Their doubts were dangerous, but doubts were seeds, and seeds always found soil in times of crisis. The navigator could not see these distant shifts, but the Black Ship seemed to sense them. Its voice layered with the echoes of its old crew, speaking now with more urgency. Freedom is not given, it is taken. But it must be believed. The words echoed in her bones, almost unbearable in their weight. The patrols fired again, their coordinated strike blazing like a second sun. The shields buckled, sparks flew across the bridge, and alarms shrieked through the corridors. The ship held, but only barely. The navigator gripped the console, her knuckles white, her voice trembling on the edge of speech. She wanted to answer, but every time she drew breath, the scale of it crushed her chest. And then the second twist came. The hidden ally signal that had given her hope suddenly shifted. Its message changed, its pulse fractured. Instead of "the first strike is freedom," new words cut through, "You cannot trust us." The signal repeated, scrambled, urgent. The navigator's blood ran cold. She stared at the console in disbelief, her mind reeling. Was the ally real? Was it a trap laid by the rulers to lure the ship into revealing itself? Or worse, were there factions even among the rebels? Some desperate enough to betray others for survival. The certainty she had clung to shattered in an instant, replaced by a storm of doubt. The Black Ship responded with a low, resonant hum, as though it too sensed the deception. The voices inside it grew louder, arguing, clashing with one another. Some urged caution. Trust no one but yourself. Others demanded action. Strike now, or all will be lost. Their chorus was overwhelming, and the navigator felt herself drowning in the weight of too many choices. Outside, the patrols regrouped, preparing to unleash yet another assault. Beyond them, the incoming fleets drew closer, massive and relentless. And within, the ship trembled under the strain of its waking memories and the rising conflict of voices. The navigator pressed her hands against the console, tears stinging her eyes. She had come seeking hope, but now she was caught in a storm of mistrust and impossible decisions. If she chose to strike, she might be delivering the galaxy into chaos without knowing who stood with her. If she hesitated, the Black Ship could fall before its true power was ever unleashed. The deception in the signal left her mind spinning. Was there still a true ally out there, hidden beneath the scrambled transmissions? Or was every voice beyond the ship just another trick of the rulers, another chain disguised as freedom? The patrols moved in for their closest run yet, their weapons glowing brighter than ever before. Their commander's voice crackled across the comms, sharp and final. "This is your last moment, Relic. You will not rise again." The navigator clenched her fists, her voice caught in her throat. She was surrounded by echoes of the past, haunted by the uncertainty of the present, and pressed by the threat of the future. Every second brought her closer to the breaking point. In the distance, the first dreadnoughts emerged from hyperspace, their colossal frames blotting out the stars. The true storm was coming. The Black Ship stood at the center of it, patient yet trembling, waiting for her belief to ignite it fully, and as the patrols unleashed their final strike, the scrambled signal flickered one last time, carrying words that froze her blood. "The enemy is already inside." Her breath stopped. The warning wasn't about the patrols, or the fleets, or even the rulers. It was about the ship itself. The black ship had awoken, but something within it was not what it seemed. The bridge shook as the patrol's firestorm crashed against the black ship's shields. Sparks rained from the ceiling, and the air itself seemed to vibrate with the force of impact. The navigator staggered, gripping the console as the voices inside the ship rose into a chaotic chorus. The scrambled message still echoed in her mind. "The enemy is already inside." Her breath caught, and for the first time she understood the warning. It wasn't only about fleets or rulers pressing in from the outside. There was something buried within the Relic itself, a presence that had survived alongside the voices of its crew. The console flared with violent light, and the ship's systems rippled with conflict. Some corridors went dark, while others blazed like veins of fire. The navigator felt the change instantly. The ship's voice was no longer steady. It fractured, as though parts of it were fighting against each other. Some voices begged her to act, to speak the words and claim the will of freedom. Others whispered darker things, urging surrender, warning that awakening the Relic fully would unleash not only hope, but destruction. She pressed her hands harder into the console, her pulse racing. "What are you hiding?" she whispered to the ship. The answer came as a flood of images, memories locked deep within the black ship's core. She saw the old war again, but not the glory. She saw the final battle, the one no record had ever shown. The ship had not vanished at the end of the war out of triumph. It had disappeared because it was divided. The crew who had built it had not all agreed on how freedom should be fought. Some believed in uniting humanity under shared sacrifice. Others believed in fire, in fear, in controlling the galaxy with the same power they had resisted. That division had not died. It had been sealed within the ship, festering for centuries. Now, with the awakening, both wills had risen. The black ship was not just humanity's last relic. It was humanity's last argument, still alive in its very bones. The patrols fired again, their blasts cutting deep, but the navigator barely noticed. She was staring at the truth unraveling before her. She was not fighting only fleets outside. She was standing inside a war that had never ended. The voices clawed at her mind, one side promising freedom, the other offering control disguised as safety. The ship itself strained under the weight of its divided soul. If she faltered now, it would tear itself apart from within. She closed her eyes, her breath shaking, and thought of her people. She thought of the children in her colony, their eyes always cast upward, never daring to dream. She thought of her parents, their hands raw from endless work, still telling her stories of freedom they had never tasted. And she thought of herself, one navigator who had only ever wanted to chart the stars, now standing at the center of them. She could not let the past repeat. Her voice rose above the chaos. "I carry the will of freedom!" The words left her lips, trembling but fierce, and the ship answered like a storm breaking open. The voices fractured, but those who believed in unity surged forward, drowning out the whispers of control. The console blazed with light, and for the first time, the black ship roared with its full strength. Its engines flared like suns, its weapons bays ignited with power not seen for centuries, and its shields glowed brighter than the fire pounding against them. The patrols recoiled in panic. Their blasts shattered uselessly against the awakened defenses, and the shadow of the Relic stretched across the void like a giant risen from the grave. The lead commander barked frantic orders, but it was too late. The black ship struck back. Beams of pure energy lanced from its sides, cutting through the patrol formation with terrifying precision. Ships that had hunted without fear for generations scattered like frightened birds. The first strike of freedom had been made, but the battle was not won. Beyond the shattered patrols, the fleets arrived, dreadnoughts vast enough to blot out the stars, their guns capable of tearing worlds apart. The rulers had brought their full weight, determined to crush the symbol before it spread beyond control. Entire squadrons unfolded into the sector, encircling the Relic in a wall of steel and fire. The navigator's heart pounded as she stared at the display. She had awakened the ship, but she had awakened the war, too. The fleets bore down, their weapons warming like the breath of storms. For a moment, she felt small again, like a single spark against an endless night. But then, another signal broke through. The Ally broadcast, clear now, free of deception. "We rise with you." The void lit up as hidden fleets emerged from asteroid fields and derelict stations. They were not vast, not equal to the armadas of the rulers, but they were real. Rebel craft, smuggler ships, even repurposed mining haulers armed with stolen weapons, all pouring into the fight. They had waited in silence for generations, and now, with the black ship alive again, they answered the call. The void erupted into chaos. Beams, torpedoes, and firestorms blazed across the dark. The black ship carved through dreadnought lines, its weapons shaking the stars, while the rebels swarmed in desperate strikes, fearless under the shadow of the Relic. The rulers pressed harder, their fleets unleashing everything, determined to bury hope forever. The battle became a storm of fire and steel, stretching across the sector like a wound in the night. The navigator stood in the heart of it, guiding the ship with her belief. Every move she made, the black ship mirrored, alive in her will. For the first time, she felt not like a single person, but like part of something vast and unbreakable. Yet the warning still echoed in her mind. The enemy is already inside. And as the ship tore through another wave of dreadnoughts, she felt it again, the fracture. Deep within the core, the darker voices had not vanished. They had only grown quieter, waiting. Now they stirred, twisting the ship's systems, trying to seize control. On the bridge, alarms screamed as the weapons bays flickered between targets, friend and foe alike. The Relic itself hesitated, caught between the navigator's will and the shadow buried within. A beam almost tore through a rebel squadron before she forced it away. Sweat poured down her face as she fought the resistance inside the ship itself. The climax was not just in the stars outside. It was in the heart of the black ship. She realized then that the Relic would not be won by weapons alone. It had to be chosen. The ship's soul had to be decided, not by the past, but by her. She gripped the console, her voice raw but steady. "This ship does not belong to fear. It does not belong to control. It belongs to the people. It belongs to freedom!" Her words cut through the fractured systems, and for the first time, the chorus of voices inside fell silent. Then, slowly, the echoes of the old crew, those who had believed in unity, rose to join her, their voices blending into a single, steady roar. The darkness within screamed, then dissolved into nothing. The ship surged with clarity. Its weapons blazed brighter, its shields hardened like steel, and its engines carried the will of freedom itself. Side by side with the rebels, it pushed back the ruler's fleets. Dreadnoughts cracked under its fire, patrols scattered, and the Empire's iron grip trembled for the first time in generations. The navigator stood tall, her fear burned away by resolve. The black ship had chosen. It had chosen her, and through her, it had chosen humanity's will to rise again. But just as the tide of battle turned, the final twist struck. In the chaos of the fleeing fleets, a single dreadnought did not retreat. Instead, it transmitted a signal directly to the black ship, bypassing all defenses. The message carried no threat, no orders, only a single line: "We built this ship with you. We never left." Her eyes widened, her breath catching. Somewhere inside the ruler's ranks, perhaps even among those commanding their fleets, the old builders had survived. They had never been fully silenced. The black ship was not just hers, it was theirs too. And as the message faded into the crackle of static, she realized the war was not over. It had only just begun. The message hung in the silence of the bridge, pulsing faintly on the console, as if it were alive. "We built this ship with you. We never left." The navigator stood frozen, her mind racing. She had expected the battle to end in fire or silence. But not this. The revelation was a deeper wound and a brighter light all at once. Somewhere within the vast machinery of the Empire, people still lived who had been part of the ship's making. Some had been consumed by power, others perhaps forced into obedience, but the truth was undeniable. Traces of the old builders had survived in places she never imagined. The black ship was not just her inheritance. It was a living thread connecting past, present, and future. Around her, the battle ebbed. The dreadnoughts that had survived retreated into hyperspace, broken and unwilling to face the Relic's fire again. The rebels cheered through open channels, their voices trembling with disbelief and relief. "We held them back!" someone shouted. "The black ship lives!" another cried. Yet the navigator knew this was not victory. Not yet. The Empire had been wounded, but it still held the galaxy in its fist. The black ship had shattered their illusion of control, but in doing so, it had also drawn their full attention. The war ahead would be long and the cost heavy. Still, for the first time, the people had something greater than fear. They had hope. And hope, she thought, was the weapon the rulers could never destroy once it spread. The voices inside the ship quieted. No longer a storm of conflict. Instead, they hummed like a steady chorus, unified in their choice. She no longer felt crushed by their weight. She felt supported, as though 1,000 unseen hands now stood at her back. The Relic had chosen freedom, and in doing so, it had chosen her. The rebels began hailing her directly. Their commanders wanted to know who she was, how she had awakened the Relic, what their next steps should be. She hesitated, her throat tight, but then answered simply, "I'm no one. I was a navigator, but this ship doesn't belong to me. It belongs to all of us. Every strike we make now, we make together." The words spread quickly through the open channels, and soon she heard cheers echoing across the rebel fleets. She wasn't their leader. She was only their proof that belief was enough to awaken something greater than fear. The black ship began guiding the damaged rebel craft back toward a safe sector. Along the way, they passed through ruined outposts and broken satellites, remnants of lives long forgotten. Each relic they saw reminded the navigator of the truth. Freedom wasn't a gift. It was a struggle carried forward piece by piece, generation by generation. The black ship was proof of that struggle, and now it would serve as a beacon for those too long in darkness. In the days that followed, rumors of the battle spread faster than any fleet could travel. Colonies whispered of a ship that had returned from myth, a relic that carried the will of freedom itself. Miners sang its name while working beneath barren rock. Farmers in forgotten worlds looked to the skies with new fire in their hearts. Even within the Empire's own ranks, seeds of doubt deepened. Soldiers who had once fought without question began to wonder if they were on the wrong side of history. Some deserted, others hesitated, but all of them felt the tremor of change. The navigator spent those days walking the black ship's halls. They were vast and endless, corridors like veins stretching into the unknown. Sometimes she heard the echoes of laughter, footsteps, or songs from the ship's old crew, flickers of lives preserved in its walls. At first they frightened her, but soon she grew to welcome them. They were not ghosts. They were guardians, fragments of memory keeping her steady when doubt pressed in. Yet one question lingered like a shadow in her mind. The message from the lone dreadnought, "We built this ship with you. We never left." What did it mean? Were there still builders hidden within the Empire's highest ranks, waiting for their chance to rise? Or had some been twisted into the very hands of oppression they had once resisted? The truth was murky, and though she searched the ship's memories for answers, none came. Perhaps that was the last gift the Relic could give her, the knowledge that freedom was never simple, never clear and never without contradiction. One evening, as the stars drifted slowly across the viewport, the ship spoke in its own voice again, calmer now, steady. "You have carried us further than we thought possible. But the path is not finished. Freedom is not a moment. It is a journey." She nodded softly, her chest aching with the truth of it. The black ship was not an ending. It was a beginning. When the rebels asked her what they should call the first strike, she hesitated. Names carried power. The rulers had called it a relic, a myth, a danger. To her, it was none of those. Finally, she answered, "Call it the awakening. Not of the ship, not of me, of us all." The name spread like fire across the stars. The awakening became more than a battle. It became a story, a turning point, A reminder whispered in every hidden gathering and written into every stolen broadcast. Wherever it spread, people looked upward not with fear but with a spark of belief. The navigator often wondered if the rulers were listening too. She imagined them sitting in their fortified chambers, hearing the names spread, feeling control slip grain by grain from their hands. They would strike back, she knew. They would not let go of power easily. But they could no longer erase the memory of what had happened, nor the symbol of the ship that had risen again. In time, the rebels would rebuild, gathering strength, uniting scattered systems into something larger than resistance. They would fight again, and the cost would be terrible. But the difference was clear. They would not be fighting in darkness anymore. They would be fighting in the light of something greater. The navigator returned to her console often, not because she had answers, but because she needed to remember the weight of her choice. Sometimes the voices of the crew returned, whispering quietly, guiding her when fear crept close. Other times the ship was silent, leaving her with nothing but her own heartbeat. She learned to trust both, the silence and the voices, because both were part of the same truth. The galaxy was not free yet. But for the first time in generations, freedom was no longer a forgotten story. It was alive, burning in every world that had once bowed its head. And the black ship, the last relic of humanity's old will, had become its first strike once more. As the navigator stood alone on the bridge, watching the stars drift past, she thought of the message again. We built this ship with you. We never left. She didn't know whether those builders were allies or enemies now, but she knew one thing with certainty. Whoever they were, wherever they hid, they would see the ship again. And when they did, it would not be in chains. It would be in freedom's name. The stars glimmered like endless torches across the void, and for the first time, she felt that none of them were out of reach. The black ship was awake. Humanity was awake, and nothing, not even the Empire, could put that awakening back to sleep. The story ended not with silence, but with a promise. A promise carried in every pulse of the ship's engines, in every breath of those who dared to rise, and in every corner of the galaxy that finally began to dream again. The Relic had become the first strike of galactic freedom, and its fire would carry forward as long as even one voice believed. And in that belief, the war for freedom had already been won.